All right, hey everybody, welcome. We just have a little bit of time before it's 10 a.m., so starting the stream closer to 10 a.m. I was just sending off some last-minute announcements, just the Zoom link for my office hours and stuff, so that's why I'm arriving just before 10, but we'll be getting started in just a few seconds. My God, you guys don't even know what my cats are doing over here. Look at this. Look at this insanity. What is going on over there? First of all, Peachy, that's up on top, I mean, she cannot fit. That's like a very narrow, like that's like just the door to the closet, right? I'm just laughing at what I'm seeing here from them. So she cannot really be propped up there. And then she's got her brother Eddie like jumping up trying to get her tail. Just so you know what's happening there in the background. Okay. Well, anyways, welcome back, everybody. Good morning. Hope you guys had a good week. And pretty much what I'm doing right now is I'm going to continue to go through our notes on utilitarian ethics. So let me refresh your memory about what we learned so far on the topic. And then we will continue today with a little bit of the criticisms from other authors against utilitarianism. Hi, everyone. Good to see you guys in the chat. Always appreciate that. So good morning. Yeah, so, okay, utilitarian ethics. We've moved into the second topic of this semester, which is ethics. That's all about analyzing the concept of morality, things like right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral, just and unjust, how a person should act versus how they shouldn't act. Human beings, you know, we're different from animals in the sense that we have kind of some sense of moral accountability. You know, in the world of nature, it's just the law of the jungle, there's predation, there's survival of the fittest. To some extent, we human beings are operating in that way, but we actually have a much more highly specialized form of accountability. We have criminal justice systems, we have mores, norms, customs that hold each other mutually accountable. So that means that humans have got such a thing as a moral sense, and as philosophers, we want to examine that as well as all other pressing and deep, interesting aspects of the human condition, whether it's religion, our ability to think about morality, our knowledge of our personal identity, or the scope and scale of the universe around us. So we're looking at ethics, and there have been different ethical theories developed which try to give answers as to what makes an action morally permissible, impermissible, or obligatory. Now, the first big ethical theory that we've reviewed and looked at is the work of John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. So just a couple of refreshing your memory points about utilitarian ethics. Utilitarianism starts with the basic idea that you should always act in whatever way would create the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Now, this is supposed to be backed up by the idea of the greatest happiness principle, which says that actions are right insofar as they promote happiness, and they're wrong insofar as they promote the reverse of happiness. Now, in that way of thinking, happiness is understood to be interchangeable with pleasure and the absence of pain. And the reverse of happiness is thus just pain and the absence of pleasure. So the more pleasure you create or pain you take away, the better you're doing morally. And the more pain you cause or pleasure you take away, the worse you're doing morally. That's the theory's basic underlying structure. It further defends that principle by appeal to the idea that pleasure or happiness is the only thing that we humans pursue as an end and not as a means. In other words, happiness and pleasure seem to be the overall supreme goal of everything you ever do. From watching this lecture right now to the things that you're going to do later today, towards the things that you have planned in your life goals and even more near-term agenda. It's all based on the pursuit of your personal happiness. So everything else that we want in life is a stepping stone towards the real goal, which is happiness. So whether it is that you want certain relationships, certain experiences, certain possessions, certain financial security, knowledge, it's all because of the pleasure derived from those sources, and that's the goal. All the other things are a means to that goal. Okay, so then it's just all about maximizing total utility or happiness with each action. And I see all you guys there, so good to see you guys, Ivan, Audrey, Vlad, Rachel, Parker, and everyone. Yeah, so that's the theory. And then afterwards, we tried to show how the theory could be applied to a practical situation, like of ordering pizza toppings for a small group. So in that case, I just kind of showed you guys how to evaluate the rating of pleasure that each individual would give to the various options, and then you would simply take the summation of the various options in terms of the total pleasure generated in each case, and then you'd be obligated to select the outcome that would yield the greatest in total of overall pleasure. Even if it's not your first preference, if you're a member of this group appointed to make the order, as a utilitarian, you think about what's going to create the most happiness for all, not merely what makes one the most happy. There's hedonism, which is a different ethical theory. I guess I didn't really mention it much, but it's not taken too seriously, I think, in the realm of ethics. But hedonism says that the right action is just to do whatever pleases you the most individually. So in that case, there's no compromise or no concern with anyone else's interests, just your own. But even though a lot of people live hedonistically, as a matter of fact, ethics is often thought of as what you should do if you're morally, enlightened or perfected. And most feel that hedonism sounds less like a moral lifestyle and more like a kind of selfish, egocentric lifestyle that has no concern with anyone else. So yeah, we're looking at the utilitarian version of ethics. Now, I wanted to help you guys understand that there are some major objections to this theory. Just as with everything in philosophy, there's always some counter-argument that is pressed against a given argument. So when we studied the philosophy of religion, we certainly saw like a whole range of objections to all the different theist arguments and vice versa. So this is also the same in this case. We're going to look at now some powerful objections to the utilitarian theory. And remember what objections are. They're just counter-arguments. They're a rational attempt to persuade someone that another argument is incorrect or defective. So let us now take a measure of what are the objections against utilitarianism. Objections to utilitarianism. Okay, so the first objection that I'm going to go over is one that Mill himself discusses in the writing that I assigned for you guys from the book, because people in his own lifetime, having read his work, came to him and got in his face about these objections, saying, here's what I think is wrong with your theory. I'm not saying got in his face, didn't have to actually be hostile, but in an academic context, people would state rational objections to his work. And here's one that he had to deal with, which was the idea, let's label the objection, a theory fit for swine. A theory fit for swine. Okay, so let's unpack this objection and get all the details out there. First off, what do you guys think? What is a swine, literally? A swine. Theory fit for swine, but what is a swine? Remember, this is his critic. This is the critic of Mill trying to make this point. So yeah, a swine is a pig, like a farm animal type hog, right? So looking at the theory of utilitarianism, I want you to try and think now, what could it be about that theory that leads anyone to have this reaction? What is it about the theory that a person might hear it and then come away with the thought, that sounds to me like it's for swine though, more than a human being. This is a theory that's fit, appropriate for, suited for a swine, not a person. Why do you think someone would make that connection? What is it about the theory that could possibly lead to this reaction to it? Even if you're just taking a guess. It's okay if it's just a random kind of not totally certain guess, but maybe you can put these pieces together. Okay, Parker, you're saying not complicated. What's not complicated? I like the idea, but maybe you could say more. Something along those lines might be the way he's thinking, though. Anyone else? Thoughts? It's not too far off, but maybe if you could expand on it a bit. Yeah, why is it a theory fit for swine? Anybody? I mean, it's all about the maximization of pleasure, and we know what pigs are. So you say here, Parker, the theory could be used on pigs because it's not that difficult to understand. Well, maybe something like that, but I think that there's a better way, perhaps, of putting it a little more precisely. What's not difficult about it? Why are you saying it's not difficult to understand? Or anybody here? I don't want necessarily only Parker to have the obligation to speak. Does anyone else have a thought? Why is this a theory fit for swine? It's not something that I think is too hard to just sort of judge and figure out. Why? Why though? For swine? Really? Why? You know what a swine is? It's a pig. It's a farm animal. It's a hog. You know what utilitarianism is? It says create the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people every time you do anything. And happiness is the same as pleasure and the absence of pain. So how do these pieces come together, leading a person to judge that this is a theory for swine? Nobody? Okay, Gary. Doing things only for pleasure will turn you into a pig. There you go. That's getting very close to his idea here. So correct. Let me put all the pieces together for you now. What he means, not him, okay? So keep in mind, Mill is not the critic of his own theory. He's presenting the criticism that others report against his theory. So in characterizing the critic, he says, people claim this is a theory fit for swine. Why? Because the theory says maximize pleasure above all. And that's the goal of each action, and that's what makes an action good and moral. But someone could argue that pleasure doesn't seem like a worthy enough goal for something as intelligent and sophisticated as a human person. Maybe pigs are the kind of things that should focus all their attention in their life on the base pursuit of pleasure. You know, and that's all that they can do. Like a pig can just eat, sleep, roll around in the mud, you know, enjoy a little pasture of space. But we are better than the pigs. We're better than all non-human animals. Pig is just one example, but we're better than the non-human animals because we have a higher intellect, a more sophisticated mind. And therefore, shouldn't we set our sights on something nobler and more important than the mere pursuit of pleasure? Telling us to live a life that's occupied by the pursuit of pleasure sounds like you're telling us to live the unsophisticated life of a pig and not a human being, not a man or a woman. Do you kind of feel what I'm saying now, or at least you understand the criticism? The critic is entering the fray by saying pleasure, though, is the wrong goal for a person to focus on. Pleasure is something that is suited to the animals, but we're better than those animals. Shouldn't we think that ethics depends on more than the generation of pleasure and has some kind of more worthy pursuit as its top goal? Okay, so that's the major criticism. Pleasure sounds like bestial, animalistic, swine and pig-like, and we are something that is better than a pig or a swine. So don't tell me to be a utilitarian. It's telling me basically to live like a pig. But Mill is going to reply to that. Okay, so keep the kind of dialogue in your mind clear. Mill sets forth the theory. Okay, then we hear this criticism against it, and now Mill is going to come back, clap back, if you will, against the critic. Okay, so here's what Mill says in reaction to the very criticism I just mentioned. He says, okay, but no, it's not a theory for swine. There's different types of pleasures, and he thinks that if you understand that, then you'll realize this is not a theory for swine at all, it's a theory for people. So Mill, in replying to the critic, distinguishes these two kinds of pleasures, okay? So two kinds of pleasure. And what are they? They're simply lower and higher. I'm putting them here in this little cross hatch so that I can give examples in each column below. Okay, so let's start off by thinking now of examples of these so-called lower pleasures. The definition of lower pleasure is just a thing that can be pleasurable to a non-human animal. Something that can be a source of pleasure to a non-human animal, like a lower animal on the level of a pig or any other kind of non-human. All right, so tell me if you guys can think. Think about our animal friends out there in the world, and what are some things that they can enjoy and find pleasure in? What are some sources of pleasure for things that are not human beings? Just give me a couple of items, and then that'd be awesome, okay? Well, you say dogs getting yummy food, but let us not limit it, Parker, to the case of only dogs, because it is just a general observation on animals that aren't humans. But fair enough, food, you know, food, eating. Whether it's a dog, cat, pig, chicken, or anything else, eating food is, of course, necessary for the survival of any life form. And that's why nature equips us with a sort of pleasure and reward mechanism for consuming food that sustains our life. So just as much as we find pleasure in eating food, that's not only for humans. Animals can enjoy food as well. Yeah, so let us not be overly specific, Stephen and Parker. I understand you're choosing given examples of like particular animals, but we're thinking of them as a general case. So food, whether it's eating, you know, the small prey of a spider or, you know, the food that's eaten by predatory animals or mammals or anything else. Exercise. Okay, yeah, I mean, they don't exercise like going to the gym like us, right? But they do, of course, engage in activity that maintains their well-being and physical health. So I would just say activity, which can span across a whole range of possible actions, whether it's running through fields together, cubs playing with each other, etc. Sex, yeah, sure, mating and sex. For the survival of the species, reproduction is needed. So, of course, nature equips the living organism with a pleasure and reward mechanism for copulating with another. And then there's gets a rub, gets a pet. Well, it depends. Okay, again, Samuel, I think you're maybe too preoccupied with the idea of domestic house pets, but you don't want to pet, and probably a wild animal would not want to be pet. Like you go up and pet a wolf, it's going to freak out and kill you. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I don't want to be too critical. Like touch, maybe not necessarily from a human, but amongst themselves, many animals bond and so forth through some forms of touch. So. Connections with family, yeah, I mean, within their familial immediate group, and it depends on the case. There are some like animals that are less or more social. But yeah, we could probably add more, but I don't want to have an exhaustive list. I just kind of want to give you a sense of the type of things that are on the list. So it's basically like there are pleasures that animals can enjoy, but they're not that sophisticated. It's eating. Oh, nobody said sleeping, which I thought would maybe be in there. Of course, you need to rest, and animals enjoy rest as much as any of us do. So there's some source of pleasure for those animals out there, to eat, to mate, to sleep, to just engage in physical activities of various kinds, touch perhaps, and that kind of companionship. But now let's talk about higher pleasures, okay? So higher pleasures are defined as pleasures, but that only us humans could possibly experience or enjoy. So they're pleasures that are not available to lower animals, pretty much because they're just too dumb to even understand these kinds of things. So what do you think could be some higher pleasures? You're a human being, so think about your human dignity and about what kind of things make you a human, the kind of things you can enjoy, but that your pet dog or cat or any other animal could never enjoy. How is it that it's always money that's the first thing to come up? Money is not itself pleasurable. The things that you buy with the money are pleasurable. But anyway, let me try and meet you halfway. Like finance and investment and stuff, like the whole concept of a marketplace where you purchase goods for wealth that you've accumulated by some means, perhaps. It's not the most intellectually rich example. So anyway, love. Animals can love each other though, Parker. Come on, you know that. I mean, not only can they form attachments to us in the case of domestic animals, but there's very intense bonds between parent and child animals or members of, let's say, the same animal collective that move together as like a little pack. Romantic love, well, there are cases of monogamous relationships in nature, like the lifelong maternal and paternal role of wolves and stuff. So, I mean, we have to be careful. But I understand, like, concept of marriage and so forth, right? Like making a social institution out of it, which is recognized in a sort of ceremony that everyone participates in. That's perhaps, I think, fair. Sports, yes, for sure. Wait, how do we know what, Parker? You're asking how do we know that animals can or cannot do what? I'd like to get back to your question in a moment, but that they don't love. Yeah. I mean, good. Yeah, I would say they do, in fact, love. Certainly my cats love me. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of love in this house with these animals. Okay, but anyway, yeah, so forms of entertainment like the arts, surely that's true. Okay, so watching a film, listening to like forms of music, or even playing an instrument, sporting activities, right? So animals play and so on, but they don't have regulations and rules which allow the sport to be executed in a systematic fashion where a winner or a loser can be declared. There's all forms of academic study, okay? I think guys have to remember the pleasures of being a college student like you are. You're studying philosophy. I know none of your animal friends know the first thing about any of those topics. Yeah, so academic study of whatever subject, whether it's math, science, history, physics, the knowledge that you can possess of those things is something that animals would never know. Language. How come nobody said language? Language, the fact that we can even talk and understand each other, that we can engage with the written word, that can be used to transmit facts from a past generation to the present. You're sitting here now and you know that whatever, America was founded in 1776 when the Constitution was ratified. But our animal friends don't know anything about anything that has happened before their own existence because there's no medium by which to transmit the facts across. They can't use language, and so they don't have symbols to convey those messages. So look, we could go further and just continue to expand the list, but the point being made here by Mill is this point. Even though some would argue this is a theory fit for swine, he says that's wrong because the critic must be thinking that when I say pursue the maximum amount of pleasure possible for the greatest number of people, that is like the idea of pursuing just which kind of pleasures, right? So Mill says that for the critic to claim this is a theory fit for swine, they must misunderstand the idea of pleasure as being solely or only which type. What do you think? To think this is just for pigs and swine, the maximization of pleasure behind the whole theory, yeah, it would mean that you must think of pleasure as merely being the lower pleasures that animals could enjoy. But Mill is now here to say that that's not the only kind of pleasure that exists, that for human beings, unlike the animals, unlike the actual swine and pigs, there is a higher level of pleasure that we can access that they can't not. And so when he says promote the most pleasure that a person could possibly experience for the greatest number, he's not merely talking about the lower, but also inclusive of the higher. And he even goes further. He says not only are the higher pleasures available to us as humans, but they're even more important and greater in dignity and value than the lower pleasures are. So he refuses to be characterized as a person who says, go out and seek pleasures like an animal would. He says, go out and seek all pleasures that we can possibly experience, which also include the higher ones. And he says that's where there's actually greater value and importance and worth. The higher pleasures matter more than the lower ones do. So he would say it's a misunderstanding and it's a false characterization of the theory to say it's a theory for swine. It would be maybe if it says just go out and pursue lower pleasures and maximize those. But Mill is telling us now that that's not correct. The theory says to promote all human pleasures, including the higher ones, which are even greater and better and more important than the lower ones. Now, he really wants to insist on the greater value of these higher pleasures, so much so that he continues by saying, they're so much more valuable and better that no reasonable human person would ever willfully choose to trade their capacity for the higher pleasures for a greater quantity of the lower pleasures. So he's saying there that the higher pleasures are so much better that if you had a choice to give them up and trade them in for a different life, which was more fully satisfied, but it was the life of an animal, you would not want to make that change. You would not want to make that little transaction because you'd lose the distinctive value of all the higher pleasures and it would degrade your quality of life in a huge way. So that leads to a famous quote of Mill, which is on page 79 of the book. I'm going to put the quote here and then discuss it a little bit, and then that'll cap off the whole discussion of this one objection of Mill's to Mill's utilitarianism. So a famous quote of Mill is this: "It is better to be a dissatisfied human than to be a fully satisfied pig." Okay, and I mean, that's my basic, synopsis of the quote, but I'll read the actual quote here, which is a little more involved. On page 79 in the left column, he says, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a satisfied pig. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a satisfied fool. And if the fool or the pig are of a different opinion, it's because they only know their own side of the question. The other party to the comparison knows both sides." Okay, so what's being claimed here is that even if you could be like the most happy lower animal with all of your lower pleasures fully satisfied, you would not prefer that situation to your current situation of being a human, even though being a human is complicated, sometimes difficult, demanding, burdensome. It is a greater state and a higher level of pleasure that you can achieve as a human than you could as an animal. even if the animal is more fully satisfied. So if you're like me and you have pets, or even if you don't, I'm sure you've had that experience where you're looking at an animal, like a house pet, for example, and you see it just living its best life, laying around, being petted, getting all the food that it wants, playing all the time, cared for its every need. And you look at the animal and you think, wow, isn't that the life? Wow, I almost wish that was me. It'd be a lot nicer sometimes than having to get up, go out there, prove myself, learn all sorts of things, make a career for myself, build relationships, make a contribution to the world, learn my place in it, know about the facts of history, science, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't it be nice to just be the animal, kick back, just get food and sleep all day, and that would be way better. But people say that, and what Mill is claiming is that when you say that, if you do, you don't literally mean it. You're being facetious. Nobody would actually want to trade off their situation to be an animal, because think about what you would lose. Even if you were that happy, satisfied, contented animal, you could no longer read, write, talk, know anything about the world except for your immediate circumstances right in front of you. So the possibilities for higher knowledge, thought, and experience all lie with humans. That's why he says, as complicated and fraught as a human life can be, it's still better to be an unhappy, dissatisfied human than to be a fully satisfied pig. And, if the pig doesn't know that his life is inferior to the quality of life of a human, it's just because they can't experience that higher quality of life. So from a human's perspective, knowing how it is to experience the higher pleasures, we never want to renounce or relinquish our state for the state of a lower animal. Just remember how cool it is to be a human being. I mean, looking around this planet, we're definitely the highest life form. And maybe in the whole universe, if there's life anywhere else we don't know, and even if there is, it's not necessarily a given that it's going to be as highly sophisticated and intelligent as us. So to be a human being is to be perhaps the best thing in the entire universe, the most intelligent and advanced thing. To even be able to engage in a lecture like this and have an education and think about topics that have been written about in the past is a unique bounty of the human condition. So he insists upon this, and that is, again, as I close this objection, that's his way of pushing back. So just a quick summary of how we got to this point. Mill lays out the theory of utilitarianism, which at its core says, maximize the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest number of people. But one critic might advance this criticism, objection. That's a theory for swine, though. Aren't we better than pigs? Why are we pursuing pleasure all the time? Pleasure is something that's appropriate for animals to go after, but for a human, it's not advanced enough, and we're better than that. But Mill comes back and says, no. There's two kinds of pleasure, though. There's lower and there's higher. The lower pleasures, okay, those are for the animals. Those are just like animalistic pleasures, sleeping, eating, mating, and all that. But I didn't say like we should preoccupy our life with those pleasures and the pursuit of them. The higher pleasures also exist. Those are only for humans. Think of things like, art, literature, language, technology, and all the academic subjects and so on. So our ability to enjoy those are the higher pleasures. When I say we should pursue pleasure, I'm not merely talking about the lower, and that's where the critic must have misunderstood. So that's his response. Now, in that case of an objection, I think Mill does a pretty good job of, replying to it. But there are some other objections to utilitarian theory that I find to be a little more pressing, a little more difficult for the theory to overcome. So I want to just quickly speak about two more. Okay. One more main objection to the utilitarian theory is simply that it's too demanding. What is it about this theory that you think could fairly be judged as it's too demanding? Like when, under what type of scenario would the theory put you, place a burden on you? Would place a burden on you that felt like a demand that would be hard to live up to? Can you imagine, like, what would be the general situation in which the theory of utilitarianism would compel a person to do things that they see as a big burden that might be too burdensome? When or in what kind of case do you have to sacrifice or whatever as a utilitarian? What do you think? When does it involve setting aside what you really want to do? Okay, Gary, giving something up yourself for the pleasure of other people. Right. Now, in any situation where there's something that you prefer, right, but that is incompatible with what's for the greater good, the utilitarian theory says, what are you supposed to do then? The thing that you prefer, or the other thing that's in the greater good, which is different from that? Well, if you're a utilitarian, you're always supposed to go with whatever produces the most overall utility. So if there's a situation where what promotes the most utility is not the thing that you want to do, you don't get to do what you want to do, and you have to do the thing that promotes the most utility. So that would require like little sacrifices and taking one for the team, as they sometimes say. Now that might not be too bad if the kind of concessions and sacrifices you had to make were relatively minor. So if it's just about, you're at a dinner and people are choosing appetizers and there's one that you really want but nobody else at the table is interested in it, you might say, okay, whatever, fair enough. I'm not going to get my way because the needs of the group, the interests of the group outweigh mine in this case. So that's fine. I want to make the decision that creates the most happiness and not to be selfish. So in that case, you might say, fine, it's a sacrifice, but it's not too bad. But where does it end, though? That's the thing. You'd have to constantly be thinking in this way. It's not just on one occasion, but on every occasion, you'd be thinking, how do I choose to do something in a way that will create the most overall happiness? So that would definitely place you under a constant burden of monitoring and acting in accordance with these principles. The other thing is that sometimes these demands could really be huge, and they could cross a line to where you would say, I can't realistically live that way or live up to that. Let me give you some examples. According to utilitarianism, the pleasure that you're supposed to maximize is just overall human pleasure, but it's not supposed to necessarily focus on just the pleasure of those people who you know or who you have existing relationships and bonds with. So that could produce scenarios where it'd be very hard to do the so-called right thing according to the theory. Like, for example, think of this. Say there's two houses, right, and they're both burning, and there's people that are inside occupying the two houses. Like there's a brush fire that's passed through this community. Now, say you're in a position where you look ahead and there are two houses. One is to your left and one is to your right. Both of them are on fire. Suppose that as you look to the left and there's one person in that house and they're screaming out, hey, come over here and just prop open the door. From their side, inside the house, they can't do that. But if you came up and you just used a tool to push the door open, it posed no risk to you, and then they could safely exit without burning to death. So you could save a human life. Now let me add another feature to that. That person over there that's in that house on the left, whose life you could save by going and just quickly assisting, that's somebody who you dearly love. Let's say that's a dear loved one. So, fill in the blank. It could be your mom, your dad, your best friend, but whoever it is, that's someone who you have a long-standing established relationship with, memories, experiences, you have a past with that person, you love that person, and they love you, so that's a close connection. Now, over here to the right, the other house that I'm talking about, it's also burning. And there's people inside of there, and they would like to get someone to help them get out. And let's just suppose there's like 15 people over there. A big extended family was all gathered in that house. So the thing is, though, you don't really know those folks. I mean, they're human beings. Their lives are important, and they don't want to die, of course. But they're unknown people to you. They're just strangers to you, even though they're human lives and they matter. So, look, if you're a utilitarian, now I put you in what's called a forced choice scenario. Let's say that I stipulate that in the case I'm mentioning, you cannot possibly save both sides because there's a window of opportunity that is closing in terms of time. So by the time you rush over towards one house to prop the door open and allow the inhabitant to come out, the other house will just be overwhelmed by the flames. So it's a tragic case where you have to make a tough choice and life is on the line. Now, probably most people, I would argue, or maybe you don't believe this, but probably most people would want to save which side? The 1 or the 15? If you're the one who's in the position to offer assistance and you can't do both, most people would probably think that I have a very powerful inclination and desire to just save who or what? What do you think? You follow the example? So give me what you think would be the response there in our case that's mentioned. You're on the scene, you can only save one side or the other, and given the description I've offered, you'd probably be most motivated to save the one. Exactly. Why? Well, because you love that person, because you know them. If that's your mom or dad, brother or sister, best friend, you'd think, well, that matters the most to me. But Parker, yeah, it would make you the most happy. But according to the utilitarian ethical theory, though, what would be the obligation stated by the theory in terms of what choice you should make? According to utilitarianism, the right action, the obligatory action, is to do what? To save the one? No, it's to save the others. Why? Correct, but why? Just let me know if you can tell me the reason why. Because there's more. Well, it's not about the majority being happy, it's about the greater amount of overall happiness being created. So, I mean, for example, if the one person dies that you love, then that eliminates all the potential for their future happiness that they otherwise would have had. So that's a huge loss of happiness overall throughout the remainder of their life. Also, it has a huge negative effect on your happiness because you love them and now you've lost a loved one, and also to all the others that may also have a loving relationship with them. But when you go to the case of the 15, that just multiplies the loss by 15. Not only is there one life that's extinguished, there are 15 of them. So there's a much greater amount of total future happiness that's been eliminated. Plus, you can multiply the harm that has been, that has descended upon their loved ones as a result of the loss by 15. Because just as much as you're attached to the one person, they have their own attachments and family members and loved ones. So basically, you'd be saving more life overall to save the bigger group. And by extension, you'd be promoting more overall happiness by doing that. But most people probably, I think, would argue that this is just a bridge too far. If the moral theory of utilitarianism says that I should forsake the bonds of loyalty, familiarity that I've formed with people in order to just discharge this obligation to do the greater good, that's a bridge too far, that's something unrealistic. Any theory that does not permit me to honor and favor the interests of those that are closer to me must be incorrect. So that's another major kind of objection. It's demanding. It's demanding because it doesn't say promote the most overall happiness for you and yours. It says promote the most overall happiness for human beings, period. And it doesn't matter who they are. So if there's unknown people who you could benefit and there's a greater quantity of them, then you're obligated to do that rather than to preserve the happiness or promote the happiness of a smaller number of people just because they're well known to you. Now, some people might hear that example and think, but I'm still a utilitarian because it just sounds like it's hard to do the right thing there, and your selfish desires try to compel you to do the thing that you prefer. But many people might say it's still righteous, though, to want to help your loved one. That can't be construed as a morally impermissible act, even when there's a greater so-called good line on the other side. Okay, so it's very demanding. And one more major objection, and this is the last one we'll talk about. This last one that I'm going to put on board here, to me, it's the biggest and toughest one. It's the one that the theory is going to have the most difficulty facing. So let's get this discussion going. The last major objection to utilitarianism that I'll go over is that according to the theory, no action is absolutely forbidden in principle. Okay, so this one is the one that really bothers me the most, I would say. I think utilitarianism has some decent, reasonable arguments in favor of it, and certainly I can agree with some things that it says, like don't merely consider your own self-interest in every case, but try to do at least some job of analyzing where other people's preferences lie, and then act in a way that generates a good outcome that on balance promotes most all happiness. I mean, that sounds good. It sounds like you're trying not to be utterly egocentric and self-centered and hedonistic. But if I was going to point out what I thought was the major flaw, the biggest one is this one to me. So let me help you understand this by asking you some simple enough questions. According to what you know of utilitarianism right now, what do you think? Does the theory say that it is always wrong, for example, to lie? Is it always wrong to lie according to utilitarianism? Or are there exceptions to that? What do you think? Yes or no? Is the theory of utilitarianism committed to it always being wrong to lie, or do they say, no, it's not always wrong? Does utilitarianism say it's always wrong to lie? Yes or no? Is it always wrong according to this theory, or is it not? Why or why not? Who can ask? Or sorry, who can answer that? Yes, exceptions exist. It's not always wrong to lie. Good. But let's ask, why not? What kind of situation would have to exist where the theory would say, in this situation, you ought to lie, and it's actually wrong not to lie? When would the theory advise lying as the moral action? Surely we can say, just in general, not too specific of a case, but what kind of case? If it brings someone pleasure, right. So let me say this, Michael. If the act of lying generated more happiness than telling the truth would do, then the theory would say lying is the right thing to do. Yeah, so for example, let me give you a hypothetical case. Suppose that, so this is kind of pre-pandemic talk, but you guys remember potlucks? Okay, so what's a potluck? It's like a group of people gather and everyone brings like a dish that they cooked so everyone can eat, and have a little social gathering, right? Suppose there was a potluck party and one person at the party brought their dish, that they made, and you see this person, they see you, they talk to you, and they're like, hey, I saw you trying my dish earlier that I brought. Did you like it? I worked so hard on it. Yesterday I spent all day getting all the ingredients just right, getting the recipe set up. I put a lot of effort into it, and it's kind of my dish that I always make. So how did you like it? Okay, now switch to your perspective. In the example, you're thinking this thought, oh, it was disgusting. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever eaten. I almost threw up. I was gagging. This is literally the worst thing I've ever eaten. It was a horrifying, disgusting meal. That's the truth. But the person's there that made it in your face asking you, hey, how was it? They're being nice. And so if you tell them the truth, let me be honest with you. The truth is it was nasty and I hated it. Well, that's going to hurt their feelings, right? It's going to hurt their feelings and it's not going to make them happy. The opposite. It's going to cause them to pain. Now, you could lie, though. You could say, oh, that was just a wonderful meal. Yeah, you got to share the recipe with me later. Top notch. Great stuff. I loved it. Now, if you tell them that, it's not true. That's a lie, right? But you could argue, an innocent little lie that makes the person feel better. And so in utilitarian world of thinking, you judge the right action based on the consequences. And if a lie makes more happiness than telling the truth, then lying is right. But to many of us, though, that just seems wrong. Like, lying is generally thought of as an immoral act. And at what point do we say it's a bridge too far? Like, maybe in this one little case, you think that's innocent enough. There's nothing too bad about that. We've all done that. That's okay. But there's no limits on it is the problem. What about another situation? A person's in a relationship, they're in a marriage, they swore that they would remain faithful, but they're cheating on the side. And if the partner finds out that they're cheating, they're going to be crushed, and it's going to really destroy them. If they never find out about it, what they don't know can't hurt them kind of thing, and they're happy, and they never know. So what? Should you conceal the wrongdoing and be deceptive like that? Because if it comes to light, then it's going to make everyone unhappy. It starts to seem like there's no value to honesty itself as long as lies preserve everyone's happiness. So that certainly could be seen as a problematic feature of the theory. It's always conditional whether a certain action is wrong or not. You can't say full stop, oh, it's wrong categorically. It depends on the case. So a lot of times lying is wrong because lying is going to make less happiness than telling the truth. But we can imagine situations where that's not so. Let me give you another one. What about stealing? Stealing, taking something that's not yours, it doesn't belong to you. Would you say that this is always wrong according to utilitarianism, or is it not always wrong? And if so, or if not, why or why not? What kind of case? Who can have any thought on this? I'm going now from lying to stealing. So is it always wrong to steal based on this theory? What do you think? What could be the answer on that? I think you know. The theory just says do whatever creates the most overall happiness. So would that permit the act of theft on cases? Parker, you say, I feel like it could be not wrong if it was for your starving family and like it would make them really happy to have a meal. Sure. We can think of all kinds of examples like where maybe the act of theft would create more total happiness than having declined to steal. So suppose that it's like a Robin Hood type scenario, stealing from super wealthy and giving to the poor. I'll just make up a case. Someone's at like a big fancy house party where there's a very wealthy person putting the event on. Suppose that like one person who's there that doesn't know the owner of the house too well stumbles into like a trophy room where there's like 10 very, very valuable pieces of jewelry or something. And they're all identical duplicates. And this is like a wing of the house that this rich guy hasn't even visited in a long time. These things are just sitting in there collecting dust. But you take one of those very valuable items, right? And there's so many of them, the person's so fantastically wealthy that they never even noticed that it was taken. Maybe it's valued at like $100,000, but this is like a billionaire and they've got 10 of them. So, you take the item and then you sell it on the black market and you generate $100,000 and then you donate it all to cancer research or something. It saves a bunch of people's lives, or you donate it to a fund that builds, hospitals in war zones in difficult parts of the world, saving little kids. We can imagine that money that otherwise would have just remained in his possession, having done no good for anybody, could now be spun off, redistributed, and generate a whole bunch of happiness and life-saving for other people. Now, does that make it okay to do? most of us would probably think, no, of course not. There's got to be a principle which says theft is wrong and it's impermissible. But according to utilitarian theory, it just depends on the results. If the results are more favorable than unfavorable for overall human happiness, then it seems now that it's the right thing to do. But it starts to make it seem as if there's no legitimacy to the concept of private property and all of that after a while. And you say, Stephen, the issue is in how we measure happiness. That's also been pointed out by some, that how are we supposed to provide the precise measure of the quantity of happiness that is to be created by any particular outcome? The thing, though, Stephen, that I think, and this is Mill addresses this point you're making himself. He said, well, some claim that you don't really know what's going to happen, and so the theory is just sort of based on predictions that can never be grounded with any reliability. But he says, no, not really. We've had so much experience in human history, knowing what the probable effect of a given action will be, that it's not like when you do it for the first time. So maybe we won't have like absolute omniscience where you're going to know to the last detail how the outcome will be. But it's not a total guessing game either. We come in equipped with the foreknowledge obtained by observation of past cases, which gives us some at least good estimation of how it would likely go out. But anyway, fair point though. So yeah, no action being absolutely forbidden is definitely a problem. I talked to you about lying, I talked to you about stealing. Now, what about killing though, an innocent person? I mean, that's the one that you'd think has to be sacred and can never be violated. But even that, it's on the table, as it were, if the consequences of doing so would create more total utility than not doing that. And although it's sometimes hard to think of situations that mirror that choice, there certainly are sometimes cases in wartime or other possible realistic scenarios. Here's one that's given in philosophy discussions to try and just generate the example that shows this problem, and it's the transplant scenario. We'll talk about the transplant scenario again in a couple of weeks when we go over Judith Thompson's trolley problem essay, because that's one of the hypothetical cases in that paper. But basically, here's a preview of it for now, just to get this point illustrated. So suppose there's 5 people here. I'm drawing 5 stick figures. And they all have this problem of an organ failure, which will kill them if they don't get a transplant. The thing is, each one has a different failing organ. Okay, so one person needs a heart, liver, kidney, the other kidney, and lung. So they each need a different vital organ. They're sick unto death. If they don't receive the transplant in short time, they're going to pass away from their ailment. So let's say they go in for whatever reason as a group to this doctor, and they're seeking his assistance to find a donor match. Now, another little plot twist to our situation. These 5 fellows that each have a different failing organ randomly have the same blood type, which is convenient because if there was one donor that matched their blood type, since they all need different organs, you could save all 5 lives by using one donor that matches the blood. But it's a very rare blood type. Oops, let's call it triple X blood. Now, why is it that 5 random people that are unknown to each other all have the same highly rare blood type? Let's just call it a coincidence, and don't worry about that question again. So there's 5 people with triple X rare blood type. They need organs, different organs. They're going to this doctor. So he goes through the donor lists, and he's trying to find anybody who's a match. But he can't find anybody. And as he's exhausted his search, he's preparing to go back in and deliver some sad news to these guys. I'm sorry, guys, I tried my best, but I cannot find a single person out there who's a donor that's available that has that matching blood, so I can't help you. But even as he's about to go back and say that, at that moment off the street comes this person. And who is this person here? It's a young, healthy individual like all you guys. Okay, so here's some young adult that just came in. And why did they come in? Just not for any special reason. They just need a basic physical medical exam. They're not having any symptoms. They're not really sick, but they're just trying to have a regular checkup with a doctor. So he has a free moment before he goes back in and speaks to them, and he talks to the one guy. He says, okay, so, I'm looking at your medical chart, and actually I noticed something. Do you guys think you know what he discovers? The doctor discovers that this random person in off the street has that same very rare blood type. So he's thinking this thought. If this one individual could be used for the donor, then we would save all 5 of their lives. So let's say he asks the young person, hey, I got a really weird and random question to ask you. So let me just put it out there. There's 5 guys in the next room dying of different organ failures. They all have the same rare blood type. trying to get a transplant going, but I can't find anybody. You came in off the street, just totally coincidence, and lo and behold, you have that blood type. So what do you think? I'm just going to see what you would say. Would you be okay? Would you be willing to let me take the organs out of your body, give them to these 5 people, and then they will all live? And if that happens, that's great because it's 5 people living, and you would die. Just going to be honest, there's no way you could survive this process, but you would take one for the team in the ultimate sense. 5 people are going to live if you allow that to happen at the cost of your life. If you don't let me do this, then think of what the result will be. You'll go on living, sure, but 5 people will die. So, what's better? To have 5 live and 1 die, or to have 5 die and 1 live? I think it's better to have more people survive. Isn't that more total happiness? So now, what do you say? If this guy is like me or you, we already know what his reaction would be. What? No, of course not. I got my own life to live. I'm sorry that they're sick, but I can't be used as like spare parts or as a means to the end of their survival, even if there's more of them than me. Now, if this doctor was the most extreme utilitarian possible, the theory anyway would have it that he ought to kill the person in order to save the 5 lives, because that's just going to generate more total utility, never mind the fact that it's against his will. But of course, most all of you, and I would hope every one of you would say, that's fundamentally immoral and wrong, though. Now, it is wrong, but it's hard for the theory to generate an explanation of why it is, because it seems that it generates more total utility. So these are problematic issues that the theory has to face. I think the biggest and difficult one is this one: no action being totally forbidden. If you're a person like me who believes that there are very strong, robust human rights that can never be forsaken, then it doesn't matter how much utility could be created by breaking one of those rights. You're never supposed to break them. So if you have that kind of intuition, then there are some aspects of utilitarianism that you might find fault with. And if so, then I guess on Monday when we return, you might like the alternative to this better, because that's Kantian ethics. So it's just kind of comparing and contrasting ethical paradigms. We've now studied one and seen some of the criticisms of it, and we will next turn the page to reading the work of Immanuel Kant. So I just ask you guys to go ahead and read Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, the pages that are set in the syllabus for that reading, and we'll try and cover as much of it on Monday as we can. So we've run close to the end now of time. I guess I'll let you guys go, but have a great weekend. I'll be in touch by email at my office hours, so anyone that needs anything from me, just let me know and I'll try to help. But are we all good, everyone? Thanks so much. Thank you, Parker, and everyone else. Have a great weekend, and like I say, we'll be in touch, and I'll see you back on Monday. Okay, bye-bye.